You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Abram Kibalevich, and I hope you enjoy this episode. You've bought your tickets. The ushers are about to open the doors. Yes, the Projectionist has Semicha is about to start. But first, if you own a retail business and accept credit cards, your customers are getting points, miles, and all sorts of rewards every time they use their card. And you're paying the price. That's why NRS Pay, a product of National Retail Solutions, a division of the IDT Corporation, offers its cash discount program FeeBuster. You can start accepting credit cards for free. If your business processes over $18,000 a month, you pay no monthly fee and $0 out of your pocket for transaction. This means you, as a retailer, can enjoy the benefits of accepting plastic, and your customers still get those crucial miles they crave and need. NRS Pay FeeBuster provides every client with a free credit card reader with no long-term contract, no early termination fee, cancel anytime without a penalty. I'm personally familiar with this company, and they truly stand by their product, and they'll help you with live, stateside-based customer service on any issue or question. Visit nrspay.com or call 833-289-2767 to learn more about NRS Pay and the fantastically fair FeeBuster. Clear the aisles, the Projectionist. That's Semicha. Hi, I'm here with Yitzhak Kolakowski. I think you decided to take my advice and take a walk with Mr. Cohen. I think I extolled the film more than any other film critic, if that's what I am, has ever extolled the film. But why don't you add a little bit of sauce to the kugel?
If anything, I just wanted to thank you for introducing me to that, because that's a movie I'd never heard of before. And you would think, we're both Jewish, obviously, both rabbis, and we're both film buffs, and I had never heard of this movie before. Did you ever hear of it before you came across it?
No, as I said, I think it's really, let's credit my good friend Yaakov Friedman's employers, TCM, for throwing it at everybody now, celebrating 100 years of Warner's. So somehow Warner's was behind the company in England that was making this. I guess, like I said last week, it clearly is definitely below the radar.
Yeah, and it's a type of movie that I think should be more well known, within Jewish circles, because it is that type of movie. It's and like you mentioned, there are no disgusting stereotypes in this movie. It's really a real interesting, positive movie. The characters are realistic and positive. I mean, not 100% realistic. It's still a movie, but and from the 30s, obviously, but it's really very well played, well done, well directed. And the fact that William Bodine made a movie like this, because he made so many, really, as my friend would call, misunderstood movies. He doesn't want to say anything's bad. This was really quite a positive, nice movie, and how this escaped us, I'm very surprised.
On that note, let's talk about Archie Mayo, who also, he made almost over 100 films. And a film that he made in 1935 was another film that I appreciated, and it was brought to my attention from TCM. I'd seen the remake of this film called They Made Me a Criminal with John Garfield, but this was a film with Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and Loretta Young called The Life of Jimmy Dolan. And
wasn't they made me a criminal? Didn't they have the Dead End Kids?
It had Garfield in it.
I think so. Wasn't right. Garfield like with the Dead End Kids with Leo Gorcey and Hans Hall and all them were?
I think you're correct, but it's basically the same story. But The Life of Jimmy Dolan, I thought, actually, despite Garfield's magnetic presence that we've talked about often between us, The Life of Jimmy Dolan is a very enjoyable film to watch. It's about a boxer who is and again, it's hard when you look at Douglas Fairbanks Jr., who plays this role, and you see him, in the ring. It's hard to really imagine that he really is an effective middleweight boxer that can actually knock people out. But again, you can suspend disbelief, and he plays it, as a real with a tough New York accent. I'm so used to Douglas Fairbanks Jr. from his later years. He affected very much an English accent. He was very good friends with Laurence Olivier and many of the other English actors. I thought the way he naturally spoke was, like a Brit. And he did, I think, move to England at the end of his life. But this is a film he made where he plays a boxer who is, to put it in our language. He presents himself as the all-American boy who just loves his mom, who lives in Yonkers. But really, he's basically a guy who just likes to party, who gets drunk, lives very high on the hog, has a lot of fancy cars and watches and other sorts of male jewelry. And after a fight that he wins, he gets involved with someone who's trying to expose him, a newspaper person who wants to expose his facade, and he gets into a shoving match with the person, and pushing him in this drunken state that he was, he actually pushes him and the person dies. Of course, Dolan is so drunk, he doesn't realize what he's done. And then his best friend decides that they are going to shaft him, that they are going to basically finger him for the murder and run away with his money and his car and leave him to be arrested when the witness comes to the police and tells them what happened. It turns out that, as you might expect, when they run away with the car, they get into a terrible accident, his best friend does, and his remains are so burnt that they're not able to identify the body, except for the pieces of jewelry and the expensive watch that indicated that it was actually Dolan himself who dies in the fiery accident with his girlfriend, which leaves Dolan waking up, finding a newspaper, discovering that he's supposedly dead, going to his lawyer, who I think is implied to be a Jewish fellow, who basically he entrusts his lawyer with his key to his safety deposit box. You understand, obviously that's a mistake. And the lawyer takes all his money that he has, gives him $200 and tells him to hop a train like a hobo, as many were in those days, and get out of here because he's officially dead. Now, the other dynamic in the film is that there is a nearsighted, sort of over-the-hill detective who the movie indicates had made a mistake and sent the wrong person to the electric chair. It was played by Guy Kibbe, and he's only known as Flaxer the detective. And somehow Kibbe, as Flaxer, has his eyes on Dolan, and he realizes that he's not who he says he is. And he remembers that Dolan, who is a southpaw in terms of the way he fights, he fights with his left hand. That's his stronger hand, in which he's able to overpower his opponents. He comes into his after he had won the championship, he came in and saw the watch. And he sort of had a little bit of conversation with him, which of course sets the tale going that Flancer does not believe that it's Dolan who has died in the car accident. The reason being is because when the body was found, the watch was on the right hand, not on the left hand, which is where a left-handed person would have his watch, making it easier for him to see. Of course, everybody dismisses Flancer because he's already sent the guy to the prison in the wrong time. And Edward Arnold has an unbilled role here as the DA who has leapfrogged ahead of Flancer and considers him just an over-the-hill person who should retire. A great little 4 or 5 minutes of Edward Arnold, who off pod, you mentioned, of course, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. I don't think there's ever been a better villain than Edward Arnold in that film. He, of course, is the big industrialist in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. So before Hollywood discovered the gem that they had in Edward Arnold in 1933, of course, he played the devil in Daniel Webster. Of course, I recommended, the Earl of Chicago. You might remember the film I recommended a couple of years ago to you with Robert Montgomery. Edward Arnold is great in almost everything that he does. It's a wonderful little role that he has here. But he's not the only surprise, and this is the reason what I want to get to. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was a pretty established star at this point, and you can believe his accent. He makes his way west to some little hamlet somewhere near Salt Lake City, and there he discovers a sort of a farm place that is being implemented to help kids seemingly with some sort of polio, although they never really say the kids have polio, but all the kids all have a limp as if, they are suffering from some sort of debilitating disease. There's only 4 of them, two of the kids there that he discovers, they are also unbilled, but one of them is Mickey Rooney, and one of his earliest talking films, and the other is Farina from the Little Rascals. But he almost steals the movie. Alan Hoskins, that's what he was known as. Alan Hoskins was Farina. And really the film, although you could say, well, come on, it's your typical black kid. In no way do they treat him as if he's somehow less intelligent or doesn't understand things. He actually comes in with a number of wonderful little zingers of commentary about what's going on, almost like a wise type of commentary about what's happening. Similarly, Mickey Rooney also as Freckles. I found this was one of the films I could take Mickey Rooney in. He doesn't overplay it. He doesn't push things. He just plays looking like, although he was probably older than what he was playing, he was just playing like a typical 9-10-year-old kid who's somewhat precocious and it really looks up to this stranger that arrives. He changes his identity. He's not known as Jimmy Dolan here. He calls himself something else, Jerry something or other. But the love interest there is you have Loretta Young, who for some reason is there on this farm helping these kids. It turns out, I guess, her uncle was the one who started. His uncle has died. And she and her aunt, who's played by Aline McMahon. Now, Aline McMahon had a very strong Irish accent, and it comes across in this film. When I looked her up on the IMDb, I discovered that her mom was Jewish. So she was actually a Jewish actress. Aline McMahon, she's the aunt, along with Loretta Young, that is taking care of these kids. And originally, he's just feels humbled that he's able to he's humbled and he appreciates the fact that he has a place. But he comes to, through the kindness that he sees displayed on this farm, the sincerity of these kids, and of course a real love starts to grow between Jimmy Dolan, Douglas Fairbanks, and Loretta Young. And Loretta Young was an actress of very great range in a way. She could she really could play high comedy. I talked about the film that she made, Love Is News, where she's wonderful. In this film as well, Loretta Young is very believable in everything that she does. She doesn't really need a tremendous script to shine, and she does shine wonderfully in this film. You understand why Dolan is able to connect to her, and how she's able, through her sincerity and the realness of the way she speaks and the way she looks, that this is something that perhaps indicates to him that he could change his life. And that maybe it was a gift, that lifestyle that he had as the champion, running around with women and getting drunk. This is now something that he's left behind. And he appreciates the real, if not hero worship, but the real friendship and the lessons he can teach these kids, who show him that although they are at a disadvantage, they never allow themselves to wallow in the victimhood or wallow in their illness. And he's moved by this to really become somewhat of a different person. The dynamics of the plot, though, however, are that the farm is in danger of being foreclosed. They don't have the money to keep things up. Obviously, these children don't pay anything, and the bank is going to take the building away and send the kids back to the institutions and leave Loretta Young and her aunt without a place to live. And it turns out that there is going to be a exhibition match of some mountainous boxer played by Sammy Stein. So you can look him up. Sammy Stein, another Jewish fellow who was huge, hairy, and you could believe it was scary to get into the ring with him. And he plays, a galoot that is being trotted out in all these little places in the West, where people will try to fight him. And if they can last one round, every round that they last with him, they get $500. And of course, they need, I think, $2,000 to be able to keep the farm. Well, anyway, Flancer somehow finds a picture in a local newspaper when Dolan decides to throw his hat in the ring. And when Flancer notices that the stance that he assumes is very similar to the southpaw fighting stance that he had in his winning round in the middleweight championship. So Flancer somehow convinces the New York police that he's going to go out there to Utah to be able to catch him. And of course, he does arrive, and he is at this fight. And as the movie builds, of course, can he stay in the ring? Can he fight those rounds? Will he be able to? And he's afraid because he sees Flancer there, and he's afraid that if he shows his typical style, he'll indicate clearly that he is Jimmy Dolan, and he is the person who was wanted for murder back in New York. Anyway, suffice to say, the film builds up a lot of good tension as to whether Dolan will win the fight. Will Dolan at least last the 5 rounds? If he does, will Flancer take him back? And you really don't know. You really can't tell what's going to happen. Now, I've saved a surprise that I didn't say up until now. It's also one of the first talkie films that features John Wayne. John Wayne plays one of these Western hicks that is going to try to fight King Cobra, and is quite scared of doing it, but feels he must because he's got a young wife and he's trying to support his wife who might be pregnant or something like that. So it's very interesting to see Douglas Fairbanks Jr. as Jimmy Dolan trying to give chizik to John Wayne. And John Wayne, although he doesn't play a cowardly part, but it's implied, of course, that John Wayne also got his head knocked off by the King Cobra himself.
Seems as it's a shove between these two movies from last week and this week, and really all of them is the Indian. Certain tzaddikim had the Indian Pravin Gullus, and on one hand, sometimes it's thrust on the person like in the Jimmy Dolan, and sometimes like Mr. Cohen, it was like the tzaddik who was makabel on himself Gullus. That was the point that I really wanted to bring out, even if he wasn't such a tzaddik, but he was. The question is, which was the bigger Gullus? Was the Gullus his hero? It's the same thing. The question is, was the Gullus in the store being a millionaire, or was the Gullus being the vagabond? And the same thing, was the Gullus, living that high fancy life as the fighter, the prize fighter, or is it? When he's out and finds himself, out in the woods and the.
Look, I think what you're saying, Yitzchak, is sort of the classic template for so many films. Mm-hmm. You can even, I'll throw in Hitchcock's North by Northwest, which is, of course, some people think it's the pinnacle of Hitch's type of suspense films, but basically it's really about how Roger Thornhill, Cary Grant's character, is a wealthy executive in Madison Avenue who gets thrown into a whole spy culture and really becomes a better person through all the difficulty and tribulations and excitement that happens to them.
You mentioned John Wayne. I think of The Angel and the Bad Man. Which maybe it's not as profound, but that the same thing. You have John Wayne and you have Gail Russell, and it was also that same type of a thing that here he's cast away because of his crimes or whatever, and the Quakers,
or John Wayne and the Quiet Man.
There he's going back to
right. He has to go back to discover exactly again, and he doesn't want to fight. If you remember, in The Quiet Man, he actually plays a fighter who refuses to fight when he goes back to Ireland. So again, I appreciate what you're trying to do, Yitzchak, but I think most films capture us because they do transport us and they do try to teach us that there are ways that you don't have to be that person who's sitting there in the front row with your frustrations and issues. And it's possible that the difficulties you're having with life might actually be windows to self-discovery. And I think that's part of the magical, I guess, corn that movies try to feed people consistently, was that, to become something, you need to perhaps remove yourself. You have to lose everything sometimes to gain. And again, you could probably, see that in almost every quest film that there is. What is it that the hero's quest was?
The hero's journey, yeah.
But the Life of Jimmy Dolan, I think, has again been overlooked. First, again, because of the remake. And, I think when, I've talked about fight films, and I Gentleman Jim is definitely still a superior fight film about what fighting is. But I thought that the pleasures that I wasn't expecting, I think low expectations in a way, is an important thing.
That's in general.
Yeah. Aline McMahon, who, is she's a button down, runs the farm. She sneaks out to the fight itself, to watch it. And just, she's like the only woman, I think, like her, sort of middle-aged woman sitting there cheering, Dolan on, Jerry, whatever she calls him. And she's sitting next to some fellow who's kibitzing with her. Again, the accent indicates that he sounds like some European Jew, like who's also out there in Salt Lake City watching the fight. And they're like the banter and
apparently, in those days, it was very popular to go to the fight. That was, like even in All for the Boss, you read from people, so Kalvachomer, you can expect one in Utah is going to be going to the fight.
His name is Adolf Fowler. And I think he was actually a Jewish fellow, Adolf Fowler. Just the throwaway lines in this film, I think, are worthwhile. As I said, the typical ending of you pay for whatever you do is in doubt. And I think that's part of, nothing too gratuitous. It's not exactly it's not going to take you too long to watch it. Yeah, I think it's definitely, it's worth a shot. It was also interesting, as we were talking off pod, the career of Douglas Fairbanks Jr. and how he might have been, not your first choice for being, a fighter. According to the IMDb site, Douglas Fairbanks was in over 100. He was an actor in over 100 films and television shows. And I think that's my feeling is that that's probably more than his dad was. And yet, I don't think he ever escaped the shadow. Maybe he wanted to be known as Douglas Fairbanks Jr., but I think when people think about him, they think about, oh, yeah, that's the son of the guy who was really the trailblazing star of Zorro and the Three Musketeers. And, before you talk about, being constantly under the weight of your parents. I'm not sure, I'm not sure if Douglas Fairbanks ever really broke out. From this film, gave me a sense that he really had some range. He died when he died in 2000.
And when was his last movie?
The last movie he made was Strong Medicine, was a TV movie made in 1986. So you're right. He was able, 15 years, he was able to, he really slowed down, I think. In the 70s, he still was very active. I think in the 80s, he was in a couple of Love Boat episodes, but I think he sort of recognized that he was already quite beyond his he's already in his 70s. He figured, okay, what do I need this for? And I think that shows, I think, a maturity as well, that he didn't have to really linger. Both Yitzhak and I would love to hear from everybody. If there's some films that you'd like us to discuss or some topic you'd like us to deal with, believe me, we're looking for things, and we'd be very happy to read your comments and questions. As much as we'd like to throw some new ideas for you, please throw us something back, and we will try to deal with it as best we can. So watch your step on the way, everybody. Take care. We'll see you next week. Be well. Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.